This is Kick-Ass News. I'm Ben Mathis. Hi, I'm Ben Mathis. Welcome to Kick-Ass News. In Motherless Brooklyn, Edward Norton plays Lionel Esrog, a lonely private detective living with Tourette's syndrome who ventures to solve the murder of his mentor and only friend. Armed only with a few clues and the engine of his obsessive mind, Lionel unravels closely guarded secrets that hold the fate of New York in the balance. In a mystery that carries him from gin-soaked jazz clubs in Harlem to the hard-edged slums of Brooklyn, and finally to the gilded halls of New York's powerbrokers, Lionel contends with thugs, corruption, and the most dangerous man in the city to honor his friend and save the woman who might be his own salvation. In addition to starring in the film, Edward Norton also wrote and directed it, and today he joins me on the podcast to talk about Motherless Brooklyn's 20-year journey to the big screen. We get into what it's like to do double duty as an actor and a director, and he shares some of the things he's learned from working with directors like Milos Forman and Woody Allen. Edward talks about the real-life New York powerbroker who inspired the film's antagonist, his own grandfather's crusade for low-income housing, and the things that get lost in the service of progress. Plus, we delve into our mutual love of jazz, classic noir detective films, and Manhattan landmarks of a bygone era. Coming up with Edward Norton in just a moment. I'm joined today by Golden Globe winner and three-time Academy Award nominee Edward Norton. He's out with a new film, Motherless Brooklyn, which he wrote, directed, and starred in. Edward Norton, welcome.
Thanks. Good to be here.
The film was just terrific. I just saw it a couple of nights ago, and it's fantastic. I think it's one of the best films of the year. Congratulations on it. This is a movie that you've been working on for, 20 years now, huh?
Yeah, it's a little deceptive to say I've worked on it 20 years. I read it 20 years ago.
Yeah.
There's a terrific novel by Jonathan Lethem of the same name, Motherless Brooklyn. And it's about a guy with Tourette's syndrome and obsessive compulsive disorder trying to solve the murder of someone close to him. And it just grabbed me because of the character. The character was so instantly memorable, and my initial impulse was just simply that it would be so cool to try to transpose that character into a film character. But I didn't work on it. It was rattling around in my head for years before I got around to actually focusing on what would it mean to adapt it.
Yeah, I mean, you really have to love something to put that much time into it. It's hard for me to imagine any project or any story to dedicate that much time to something.
Well, it's funny, like roles that you, as an actor, roles that you connect with and you think, wow, this would be hard, challenging, that if you're lucky, they come along, but they don't necessarily come along all the time, and certainly not ones this good. And so some of it was a sense of real connection to the idea of the character. But then once I spent a couple years adapting it, and the only reason it took that long was that I'd sort of ditched the modern conventions of the plot of the book.
Yeah.
And reset it in the 50s and wove in this whole kind of dark history of New York in that era. And that took a while. And once I had done that and I was happy with that and thought that it had something, it's sort of like at that point you've invested that next level of effort in it. And at that point, it's a stubbornness gene. It just sort of kicks in. Like I felt like I knew what I wanted to say. I felt like it could be compelling. And, it's not like I was bored or not. It's not like I was giving
Right,
up work.
yeah.
It's just that when you say why does it
You've been
stay
a
in the
busy
head?
guy.
Yeah, it stays. It stays, and if something stays in my head and I want to do it, it was just kind of a conviction over time that I didn't want to be thwarted on it. I wanted to find a way to tell that story.
Yeah, and you mentioned that the original novel was, I think it was set in the 90s.
Yeah,
the
the late
original,
90s
the
in
original
Brooklyn.
novel, Motherless Brooklyn. But you chose to set it in the 50s. What was the thinking there? Was it just that noir is so closely tied to that era of the 40s and 50s, the post-war era?
Yes, I think that it was partly that the book feels like an old-fashioned detective novel.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit postmodern. It's got conventions in the story that are very modern, but the characters feel a little bit like people who have been in a time capsule. They have, and some of it had to do with wanting to play Lionel's affliction, the condition that he lives with, a little bit more hard-edged. I didn't want it to be a joke. I didn't want it to be like, and this isn't like that. There's that show with Tony Shalhoub, Monk. You know what I mean?
Right.
Right. And it's a lot of fun, right? But I didn't want it to be a running gag.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted him to have some authentic loneliness, authentic sense of isolation. And the funny thing is, in the modern world, and even in the novel, he has a book saying about understanding Tourette's. You know what I mean? And there is more understanding of it now. The idea to me that even he doesn't, if you said it in the 50s, even he doesn't know what he has.
Right. Everyone's calling him freak show
Yeah.
and stuff like that. Yeah.
But even that notion that even he doesn't know what's wrong with him, if you think about how isolating that is, how frustrating that would be. And I liked the idea that there's a kind of a depth of loneliness to his condition that's sincere, and because I thought you could look. I really like movies like Forrest Gump and Rain Man, and I think underdog characters that make people root for them are compelling stories.
It kind of turns the traditional noir detective on its head, because when we think noir gumshoes, it's usually, Jack Nicholson or Bogart, these guys who are quick with a snappy comeback to anything, these wisecracking detectives. And he's kind of the opposite of that.
Yeah, he's
can
kind of a
barely
hot mess.
articulate himself.
Yeah, I mean, he you can tell smart, that he's got talents, but the risk he always has to live within is that his condition is gonna trip him up in any kind of a situation. So yeah, I like the idea that the detective, who's usually the coolest guy in the room in some ways, is in fact kind of hitting all the normal places that a detective is smooth, and he has a bumpier ride.
Yeah, and it's a wonderful little window into his head too, because it's almost like you're getting an inner monologue of the character.
Yeah, and that's what creates that empathy and that intimacy too. I think when you can hear someone telling his own story, and when you can hear him, when you have an intimacy with, like, I don't want to say the real person, but with the calm center, then you feel even worse for him.
Yeah. He also has OCD, which is kind of perfect for a noir detective, because he's the guy who just can't leave something alone. He can't stop thinking about those pieces that don't fit. Yeah.
And he has a terrific memory. But yes, I like the idea that it's like, it's funny because when you say, like, well, you have to have a pretty strong feeling about something to work on it that long. But part of it is I relate to when he says in the film, an unfinished puzzle makes my head hurt more than most people. That's a little bit how I feel with
Really?
stories. Like, if there's a certain story I want to tell, it's like, it actually is like, it's sort of like doing damage the longer it hangs out in your brain, and you want to like smooth it out, let it out, and let it go, you know.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you decided that you wanted to set it in the 50s, how did you present that to the original author of Motherless Brooklyn? Was he on board with that?
Yeah, he was. I think Jonathan's a great artist. He's not just a great writer. He understands film. He was very he wasn't protective of the book. He was not even protective. The character is what mattered to him, and I think he knew that I wanted to stay close to the emotional truth of the character. But he loves old noir too, and so I think the idea of his character going into an even bigger tapestry of a story was kind of wild and cool to him.
And the 50s are such a great era in New York because it's kind of that transition from the 19th century New York of Edith Wharton into this modern metropolis.
Yeah.
And you get into that a lot with this movie because your main antagonist, I guess, is based on pretty directly Robert Moses, right?
I would say inspired by more than based on, because obviously there's a ton of detail about what happens in the story, but also who he ends up being and things he's done that have nothing to do with Robert Moses. Like, and I think that, but the idea of a shadowy boss of the whole city who is not elected and is kind of hiding in plain sight, with people thinking he's the parks commissioner, and in fact he's really running the city.
Right.
That's very true to the way Robert Moses ran New York across the whole middle of the 20th century.
Yeah, he held 12 different positions on within the city government.
Yeah. So this the real Robert Moses and others like him, who I think amass power that we didn't give them. It was something of interest to me. The idea of power accumulating out of sight and the danger of that was interesting to me.
Right, and without any input from the people, like you said, an unelected official, that's able to accumulate all that power.
Yeah, in this country, we put a certain faith in the idea that the people have the power, right? And we know that politicians, and we know there's a certain amount of tolerance for, the way the sausage gets made and the realities of politics and all of it. But we do expect ultimately that there's no one who's got massive amounts of power that's outside of our checks and balances, right? Yeah. And when they do, we get a little, to me, one of the interesting things about noir movies is they always sort of say, hey, how much of this are we going to let go on before we start getting a little bit offended by it?
Yeah, it's it reminds me a lot of, say, Chinatown or L.A. Confidential, those types of films, which, of course, are all set in L.A., which is funny. Even Maltese Falcon was set, I think, in San Francisco.
Yeah,
there aren't that many famous noir detective movies that are set in New York that I can think of.
There's
Why is that?
It's funny. There are, there's movies like Sweet Smell of Success is a very dark New York movie that I love, but it's about people in the PR trade. It's not about detectives. And there's some like The Naked City, but I have to say that I rate as almost like B movie cliche. You know what I mean? That's almost so on the nose that it feels a little laughable now when you watch it. Like, there's 100 stories in The Naked City, and it's just a little too leans into the cliche a little bit too hard.
And I have to say, Alec Baldwin is just terrific as Moses Randolph. He's so good at playing those larger than life characters who are just kind of a force of nature of their own.
I think this is one of Alec's better dramatic performances ever. I think he's incredibly powerful in it, and disturbing, compelling and disturbing. And but the thing is, before Alec was a celebrated comedic actor, for those of us who came up in New York, he was on stage doing Streetcar Named Desire, and just great in it. Or Glengarry Glen Ross, or these things that to a lot of us made him a very iconic, sort of dramatic, forceful, dark actor. Malice. I really like him in Malice.
Oh yeah.
He's really, really great in Malice, and I always had a conviction that, if you're looking for someone who's like a lethally intimidating, lethally charming, and who has real old world kind of the heft of a real New York power broker like that, Alec is he's perfect in this part.
Yeah, he's just terrific in it. And it's interesting because you don't necessarily frame things in terms of good versus evil, because we've all seen probably 100 times the real estate developer as the bad guy. You don't do that with this film necessarily.
Well, he's a visionary. There's no question. He's not. When Alec and Willem Dafoe obviously is in the film and plays his brother, who's an idealistic person involved in the machinations of what's going on in the city. But we talked about like Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker, the idea of people who are really are Jedi Knights, like they're there to protect the world, and they are very powerful in the Force, right? But one of them goes dark, like one of them goes to the dark side, and but that doesn't mean he's a clown or just a villain. He's actually like he's like Darth Vader. He's powerful. He's a powerful dark figure.
Yeah, because even he has his vision of the city. It's not like it's entirely just for ego.
No, nor
he
for
thinks
greed.
that he is doing what is necessary to turn this into a modern city.
Yeah, he has a rationale, but he also is. But he also has come to have contempt for other people. He's like a true authoritarian.
Yeah. He just steamrolls over the people who get in the way of him, and eventually, many of the people that would have been portrayed in this film end up in the projects. He kind of designs this. The real Robert Moses kind of designed this prison where he kind of moved everyone to. Place of human misery.
They completely atomized stable middle class and working class minority communities and ghettoized them, literally, like pushed people into these the projects, which became true poverty traps.
Yeah. We're going to take a quick break, and then I'll be back with more with Edward Norton when we come back in just a moment. For companies, governments, and even individuals, managing the ever-evolving cyber threat landscape can be the difference between thriving and being thwarted. Afternoon Cyber Tea with Ann Johnson has insights for CISOs and key decision-makers striving to succeed amid rapid change without compromising security. Each week, Ann Johnson, Corporate Vice President for Cybersecurity Solutions at Microsoft, talks with cybersecurity thought leaders and influential industry experts to explore perspectives on implementing new tech, next-generation security risks, current trends, and the future state of cybersecurity. Join Ann as she and her guests explore the risk and promise of tools and systems powered by AI, IoT, machine learning, and other emerging technology, as well as the impact on how humans work, communicate, consume information, and live in this era of digital transformation. Because it's not enough to keep up with cybercriminals, you need to stay a step ahead. Afternoon Cyber Tea is available on Apple Podcasts and Podcast One. Listen in to lead the future of security. On average, over 27,000 Americans are diagnosed with breast cancer every month. Invitae believes that's 27,000 too many. That's why they're helping more people take control of their health through medical quality genetic testing. Whether that means continuing your current health routine or starting mammograms earlier, your results can give you confidence that you're taking the right steps for you. Learn more and order your kit today at invitae.com. That's INVITAE.com. It's no secret that I like to end my day with a good cigar. Smoking a good cigar is an experience, but like wine, it can be intimidating to get started. but not with PuroTrader. PuroTrader makes the global cigar marketplace easily accessible right from your laptop or mobile device. PuroTrader is like one of those travel sites that searches the entire web for the best deals, except instead of flights, you're searching for cigars. From everyday cigars for the casual smoker to the rarest of the rare sticks for the collectors. And it's all in a supportive community setting where you can ask questions and read real reviews. Buying cigars and entering the community just got a whole lot easier with PuroTrader. Whether you're on the hunt for a rare, unique cigar or just looking to get started, PuroTrader is the only destination you need to get educated, monitor market trends, and join the conversation. Check out PuroTrader.com and use the promo code NEWS for a chance to win a day at the Porsche Racing Experience in Los Angeles or Atlanta. That's PuroTrader, PuroTrader.com, promo code NEWS. And now, back to the podcast. And this is something that I guess relates to your own family because your grandfather, I read, started a low-income housing organization. Is that right?
Yeah, he was himself a real estate developer and a very celebrated thinker about cities. He wasn't just a philosopher. He did very famous projects to like take dilapidated parts of Boston and Baltimore and totally revitalized them with creative redevelopment and stuff like that. So he was an actual developer, but he became for a lot of people this kind of leader in progressive sort of humanist ideas about cities and how they could be better planned, redeveloped, etc. And he, in his later life, he built an organization called Enterprise that became one of the largest nonprofit developers of affordable housing in America. Yeah.
Wow.
And I worked for him.
Yeah, and you're still involved in that.
Yeah, I'm involved in it in a supportive sense. But I actually worked there in the first couple of years out of college, and that's when I really got to know New York and understand some of the dynamics that in the past that had led to the circumstances of a lot of homelessness and dislocation.
Yeah. Did your grandfather ever meet Robert Moses?
There's a rumor, a family rumor. I think one of my uncles told me that he did.
Really?
Yeah, sometime in the 60s. My recollection is that my uncle told me that he was very shaken by meeting him and that he thought he was a very dangerous person.
Yeah. Very, very intimidating.
Yeah.
And I have to say that I also love that you set the protest scene in your film in Washington Square, which I'm assuming kind of evokes Jane Jacobs, who went up against Robert Moses when he had a proposal to run an expressway straight through Washington Square Park, right?
Yes, through Greenwich Village and through Washington Square Park. He was gonna put expressways everywhere. He was gonna put one down on Battery Park. He was gonna. There was at some point, I don't remember if he was talking about an expressway through Central Park, but he definitely fought against Joseph Papp wanting to put a theater there.
Yeah, he was all about the car. He wasn't a big believer in kind of the democratizing power of mass transit.
No, not at all.
He believed that New York was going to be a driving city.
Yeah, and the roads he built became the worst parking lots in the world.
Right.
He would not listen to people after the war who were pleading with him when he built these highway corridors to put mass transit in the corridors as well. He wouldn't do it. For those in New York, Washington Square Park, Jane Jacobs, that was actually later. It was in the 60s. In the 50s,
oh, right.
In the 50s, there was actually a woman named Hortense Gable who actually did have a committee against racial discrimination on housing. And Cherry Jones's character is more specifically inspired by Hortense Gable, but yes, there's a strong element of Jane Jacobs in her too. Which is, the great thing about films is if you're going to tell a true story, and you're going to say this is a true story, I think I'm a big believer you shouldn't bend the truth a lot. You should have conviction that the story is compelling.
Yeah.
But if you're going to try to get at essential truths, to me, there's a reason that, Citizen Kane is notionally it's about William Randolph Hearst, but it's not. It actually is a blend up. And if you read the history of that, they pulled details from the stories of different people.
Right. Howard Hughes and others. Yeah.
And and when you make something literary, like Robert Penn Warren's famous book, All the King's Men, is people say it's about Huey Long of Louisiana. The character is called Willie Stark. It's very recognizable in some of its component parts as Huey Long, but it also makes some stuff up about an affair and about all kinds of stuff. Yeah. So I think that Chinatown too, you mentioned Chinatown, there was a real person, William Mulholland, who was the water commissioner.
Right.
But in Chinatown, there's a Hollis Mulray, right? Films, you can, when you make things an imagined story, you can sometimes have the freedom to distill the story down to its essence instead of telling people that something happened exactly this way.
Yeah, and Motherless Brooklyn, even though it's set in the 50s, it still seems that it's very much of our time because it's addressing these issues of power unchecked and gentrification and urban renewal. I mean, all things that are incredibly relevant today, perhaps even more relevant right now.
Yeah, and discrimination. I think the way we treat people, having empathy versus getting things done in ways that don't factor in people's personal experiences, their communities. But the funny thing is you can't. You want those things to tickle at people's brains, but mostly when you make a film. I mean, what I love about L.A. Confidential or Chinatown, but I remember I went back to found Chinatown later. When I was young, I saw L.A. Confidential, right? And I'm not sure I could tell you what the plot of that is now. It's something to do with corrupt cops.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The corruption is in the police force.
Right.
And I don't remember why. A call girl rang or something like that.
Yeah.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, it was a celebrity lookalike call girl ring. I think,
right. Okay.
It?
So see, I forgot that. Totally forgot.
Yeah.
When you say that, I think that's right. But I forgot that. That is not L.A. Confidential for me. When I saw it the first time, it sort of hypnotizes you. It's like it flicks a switch, it starts, and then it's like someone flicks a switch in your brain, and you go, "Oh my gosh, this is great! It looks great. The actors feel very grown up. The music is great, and something in you just goes, I'm in for the ride." Right? You're just, and when that happens, you can. That's the magic of movies. It's you take people on in through the screen and into a bigger world, and it seems amazing that it's been recreated, Yeah. And when that is happening, you can ride a long way. You can get lost in the plot. You can not know exactly what's going on, but it doesn't matter because it's pleasurable to be there.
Yeah, and it's fun to get lost in kind of this bygone era of New York. And the film sort of deals with what we lose in this relentless pursuit of progress and some of the landmarks that aren't there anymore. Precisely because of that, I suppose, it must have been a daunting task finding the right locations for this movie.
It was. It was like going on a treasure hunt, You have to find the places that allow you to do it at scale. Like, I didn't want it to be like a kitchen room drama. I didn't want it to be I wanted to have a big car chase through Manhattan in the 50s, through Harlem in the 50s, and over into Queens, you know what I mean?
And then you got to get the cars.
Yeah. I wanted to have the big rooms, the halls of power, a real sense of the scale of New York. That's very unique. You have to go hunting for the way that you can create that.
Yeah.
It's challenging.
Yeah, and I love you for including Penn Station, the old Penn Station in this film. Lionel sort of chases the MacGuffin of the film to Penn Station. I won't give away too much, but
something important gets found there.
Something important, and it's just another wonderful homage to the New York that we've lost. And I suppose, in fact, you could probably draw a line between Robert Moses and the destruction of Penn Station, because again, he was the guy who was favoring automobile drivers as opposed to mass transit, and you know, there's a little blood on his hands there too.
Yeah, your Penn Station was part of the transcendent experience of coming in and out of New York. There's the famous line that you used to descend in New York like a giant, and now you crawl in like a rat.
Right.
You know what I mean? And it is it changed the whole. It lots of great cities, you can enter them and leave them through a grand train station. New York has Grand Central Station, but that's for the local trains and the subway.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
We lost our big equivalent of Victoria Station in London. We lost like the big gateway to the city, and
and it's still kind of a gaping wound for New Yorkers.
It's like one of the things that haunts New York. You know? Because it wasn't lost for a good reason. It was lost to a backroom deal.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. And the film was just beautifully shot. At some points, there are scenes that I guess almost remind me of Edward Hopper paintings.
Yes, there's some references to his, but that's just Dick Pope is one of the great cinematographers, and he has an amazing feeling for light, the spill of light, and lonely spaces and big spaces. He's really one of the. I did The Illusionist with him, and which a lot of people enjoy. And his photography on The Illusionist he was nominated for it, I think. But he's a master, and I love the way he was able to make it feel visceral and real, but of another era.
Yeah, and I have to bring up the score. I think it's one of the best scores that I've heard in, God, I don't know how long. The music is interesting because you have kind of the traditional noir-y, bluesy jazz, but then there's an underlying thing of this synth music that kind of creates this disconnect. What were you going for there?
Well, I do. You know, there are some. Daniel Pemberton is the composer you're complimenting, and I think he's a genius. We talked about things like the Chariots of Fire score. That's this 1920s running movie that has this Vangelis synth. And then also a beautiful classical piano, and even in that main theme, you know, you hear like synth drums and a synth, and then the famous da 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 da. That's all on a piano, you know. And the blend, there's something classical, but something edgy too. And I like those mashups, and and Daniel had the thing was that Lionel's head, the main character, he's got this churning brain, and there's a dissonance in his brain. There's a looping quality. I think jazz has a very Tourettic quality, actually. It's very improvisational, and it can be very...
Especially bebop.
Explosive and staccato, and yet at the same time, like, there's a dissonance, a modernist dissonance in the way that Lionel's head loops back, and almost like rewinding tape. You know what I mean? And so in addition, I talked to Wynton Marsalis, helped with the jazz, and then ultimately played the horn on Daniel's beautiful score. But I called up Tom York from Radiohead, who I've known a long time, and because I wanted a ballad for the film that felt like out of that era, but then, like you're saying, had a little bit of an edge to it, a little bit of a dissonant edge that could represent Lionel's inner life. Yeah,
the score is wonderful. In terms of casting, you've got this great group of actors. You got Bobby Cannavale, Willem Dafoe, Alec Baldwin. Was it important for you to cast New York actors, particularly New York actors with theater chops?
Yeah, I did. I mean, even Bruce Willis kind of, he's from Jersey, and he started in New York in the theater. People don't know that, but Bruce was a theater actor in New York, and he was tending bar in New York for years and years and making his way. And I think Bruce still has a kind of a Jersey, New York cool to him. He's always had that to me. But yes, there's just a lot of people that I've worked with in New York over the years or gotten to know in theater, but also in film jobs. And I just felt like it's hard to fake New York, you know?
Yeah.
Sometimes actors who are not from New York, when they're doing New York, it's hard to explain. It gets a little funny, a little over the top. And there's some people, but it wasn't just that. It was also that we had to shoot the movie pretty fast. And I needed people with a theater background to come in ready with the whole text.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Now, what was it like switching between directing and acting? Because I guess this is not the first time that you've done that, but at this point, are you able to do that pretty seamlessly?
Yes, but this one was definitely harder.
Really?
The one I did with Ben Stiller, called Keeping the Faith, it was lighthearted, and Ben is also a director, and it was easy to just do things very on the fly with Ben. This had characters, not just mine, all throughout, who they needed a more they were challenging characters. They have a lot to say.
Yeah.
And I was mostly concerned with being a distraction to the other actors.
Right. Okay.
In other words, actors rely on each other to sustain their focus. And when one of you is ping-ponging out of the scene, it can be a little distracting.
Right.
And I needed actors who were okay with that, who honestly didn't need too precious a bubble of method focus, because I wasn't able to provide that.
Yeah. Well, it can kind of mess with the power structure of that relationship.
Yeah. I mean, everyone in this really trusted me. They really, they were there to help me, which is amazing. The thing on the plus side, I think some people would say, on the plus side, an actor who's directing, I think sometimes directors think that actors need more than they need. That they'll talk for a long time, and sometimes all an actor needs is a verb. You know, I sometimes say like the best thing you can give an actor is a single verb or a single adjective. Like, you know, you say, "You're seducing him. Just persuade him." You know what I mean? Like, but you think about it, you're like, I know what that means. I know what the difference in those two things is.
Yeah.
You know, or it's like, just persuade him, don't criticize him. You're like, oh, okay, yeah. And good actors know exactly what that means. They know exactly what to do with that. But
so less is more when
less
directing.
Is more. Absolutely.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting. Now, I know that you worked with Woody Allen, and I think that he has a similar approach, right? He
says almost nothing. So, by the way, two of my first directors, Milos Forman, who was one of the greats of all time, he said almost nothing.
Yeah, really?
He really believed, he told me he thought that directing was mostly casting and editing. And that in between, you should just run the cameras and get as much as you can. Yeah. But he really believed that you should cast people who, if they open their mouth and they're speaking, they're right in the role.
That's funny. Yeah. Interesting. Hitchcock was similar. Hitchcock, you know, another person who wasn't known for giving much direction.
I don't know that. It's funny. Hitchcock is a director that I don't know that much about. Although he said one of my favorite things, that he said that directing a film is like getting pecked to death by 1,000 pigeons, because so many people want answers out of you.
Yeah, but you know, it's funny because I think that there's a scene, the climactic scene of the movie, and it kind of takes place on Fire Escape. That kind of reminded me of a lot of Hitchcock.
That has a little bit. There's a fight scene in Hitchcock that I love, in North by Northwest at the end when they're chasing Cary Grant. Yeah. And is it Tippi Hedren? I can't remember.
I think so. Yeah.
No.
Or was it
Eva
Marie Saint?
Eva Marie Saint. Yeah. Sorry. On Mount Rushmore.
Yeah.
You know, And you remember the scene where
Yeah.
they're clinging, they're literally clinging
Yeah.
to the forehead of like George
Right.
Washington. It's amazing. And there's the one part where the guy falls. I don't want to give it away, but I thought that idea of like a fight along a vertical surface was very scary. When I was a kid, and so I thought that would be fun.
Yeah. That was a terrific scene there. Before we go, I'm curious, do you expect that audiences will see shades of Donald Trump in Moses Randolph?
Maybe shades, but I don't think anyone will mistake. I don't think anyone will mistake Moses Randolph for Trump because, first of all, Moses Randolph is portrayed as a genius. I mean, he's portrayed as a brilliant, visionary who hides his true nature. You know,
right?
Trump, no matter what you think about him, you can't deny that he's just all out front.
Right.
He's all, ego, and in many ways, my character is. I think what we're suggesting is that it's by very nature of the brilliance with which he hides himself that is what makes him so dangerous.
Yeah. Trump puts it all out there. That's for sure. But there is sort of the idea of power unchecked and that kind of ambition and rolling over the little people. I mean, his dad was a slumlord.
Yeah, true enough. And I think that the question that's in the film in many ways is, are we gonna confer kind of a heroic characteristic on people just because they sort of they have power or they're forceful or they get things done, even if that's at the expense of people? Or are we going to say, no, people caring for other people is who we want to be. Yeah. That's what America is. Yeah. That's what here. And in a lot of ways, Lionel, as the centerpiece, he is not, in fact, in some ways, the hero. He has to figure out who he thinks is heroic and pick a side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It really speaks to the moment. And it's just such a terrific film. I can't recommend it enough. Again, Motherless Brooklyn is out in theaters now. Edward Norton, thanks for talking with me.
Pleasure. That was great. Thank you.
Thanks again to Edward Norton for joining me on the podcast. His film Motherless Brooklyn is out now. Check your local listings for theaters and showtimes. Staying a step ahead of cyber threats can be the difference between thriving and being thwarted. Afternoon Cyber Tea with Ann Johnson has insights for cybersecurity decision makers striving to succeed amid rapid change. Each week, Ann Johnson, Corporate Vice President for Cybersecurity Solutions at Microsoft, talks with key security experts to explore perspectives on implementing new tech, next-generation security risks, and the current and future state of the cybersecurity industry. Afternoon Cyber Tea is available on Apple Podcasts and Podcast One. If you enjoyed today's podcast, be sure to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and rate and review us while you're there. 5-star ratings and detailed reviews are one of the best ways for new listeners to discover the show. You can also follow us on Facebook or on Twitter at @KickassNewsPod and recommend us to your friends on your social media. For more fun stuff, visit kickassnews.com, and I welcome your comments, questions, and suggestions at comments@kickassnews.com. For now, I'm Ben Mathis, and thanks for listening to Kick-Ass News.